Welcome back, everyone, to our second lecture on mind-altering substances. In today's class, we will shift from ancient Egypt and China to the Americas and discuss some of the evidence for drug use among the ancient Maya and Inca. Mayan culture and its predecessors controlled Mesoamerica for well over 1,000 years. And throughout that time, we have evidence of a vast array of mind-altering substance use. One of the cool things is that we have both archaeological evidence from the Maya themselves and historical evidence from Spanish colonists, providing two very different yet equally interesting perspectives on drug use in the Americas. Let's kick things off with a brief overview of Maya culture, which can be traced back to the rise of the Olmecs between 1500 and 200 BC. During this period, small egalitarian villages linked to a remote mythical ancestor began to coalesce in the Yucatan. Over time, certain families began to acquire larger numbers of resources, becoming spiritual and political leaders in their communities. Around 1150 BC, these elite families began constructing large public buildings built on massive earthen platforms. At the same time that these monumental buildings were being constructed, Olmec settlements were also expanding their trade networks, acquiring luxury goods like mirrors, seashells, feathers, ceramics, and obsidian from the Gulf of Mexico. Over the next several centuries, what we think of as Mayan civilization began to form as these smaller villages were consolidated under the political and economic control of four major Mayan city-states. Teotihuacan was one of these four regional capitals. At the height of its power as a regional center, Teotihuacan had an estimated population of 120,000 people and covered 5 square miles. The iconic temple complex at Teotihuacan was dedicated to the mythological figure of the plumed serpent. Archaeological evidence from the central marketplace at Teotihuacan indicates that 200 warriors have been sacrificed at various times as part of the religious rituals associated with the plumed serpent ritual complex. Piecing together early Mayan religion is tough because we don't have specific texts written from this period. But by combining the archaeological evidence we do have with later texts such as the Popol Vuh, the Mayan creation myth eventually recorded by the Spanish, it's possible to fill in some of these gaps. From these sources, we see that Mayans believed that divine beings not only ruled the heavens and the underworld, but also interacted with people. It fell to the role of shamans, priests with special access to the divine and the spiritual world to connect with these gods. And to do so, shamans often incorporated the use of mind-altering substances. The most prominent and distinctive of these substances were bufotoxins, basically psychoactive substances found in the parotoid glands of several toad species. In particular, the Bufo alivarius, or Sonoran desert toad, contains a variety of these bufotoxins, 2 of which are hallucinogenic, which would explain the unique connection with the divine. So it's licking these Sonoran desert toads which would put the shamans into a hallucinogenic state. How do we know this? Well, the arid climate has preserved dried toad skins in ceremonial Olmec contexts. Moreover, ceramic vessels in the form of these toads have been discovered by archaeologists in similar ritual contexts. By the time of the classic Maya period, covering most of the first millennia CE, Mayan populations, and especially priests, consumed a wide variety of mind-altering substances. Often they would mix together alcoholic elixirs with other psychoactive substances to increase the intoxicating effect. One of the most common drinks, balche, was created from the bark of a tree and the honey of a bee. And once inebriated, imbibers could connect with the gods to divine their will concerning illness or weather or agriculture or warfare. Balche, it turns out, is fairly low in alcohol, though. So in order to get drunk enough to connect with the gods, you would have to drink a lot of it. And this often led people to vomit. In a rather disgusting custom, people who vomited from drinking balche had to wear a bag with their vomit in it around their necks for the rest of the night. Another widely consumed intoxicating drink, pulque, was drunk throughout the year, but downed in especially high quantities during religious festivals, weddings, and fertility and agricultural ceremonies. This drink was derived from the agave plant, and Mayuel was the divine embodiment of this plant, a beautiful goddess known as the woman of 400 breasts, due to the sap that the agave plant produced. According to Mesoamerican mythology, the great god Quasquiotl fell in love with Mayul, and as they embraced, they turned into a tree with 2 branches rooted in the ground. But Mayuel's mother was furious, and she split the tree in 2 and then chopped it into pieces. The god Quasquiotl collected these pieces and buried them, and from this arose the agave plant, from which pulque was made, bringing some peace to Quasquiotl that his love would provide happiness to the people for all eternity. However, alcohol and toads weren't the only substances used by the ancient Maya to create hallucinogenic effects and to connect with the gods. Wild tobacco, known formally as Nicotiana rustica, was also used to achieve entheogenic effects. Now, this wasn't just like smoking a cigarette or vaping. This was some really heavy stuff. The Mayas smoked and chewed this wild tobacco and sometimes even used it in enema form, especially in the realm of sacred ceremony. The 17th century historian Francisco de Fuentes y Guzman recounts of the Maya use of wild tobacco, noting that, quote, they all adored and attributed divine power to the herb they call piziet, which is tobacco. Their custom is to imbibe the smoke and thus inebriated. They will invoke the devil to learn about their future. So we can see that even drugs that are used today could be used in very different ways at very different strengths and for really different purposes in Mesoamerican antiquity. Other substances seem odd to even really consider as a drug. For instance, water lilies, a seemingly delightful plant, were consumed for their psychoactive properties and the belief that they'd increase fertility. The flowers were especially associated with the gods of the underworld, whom the Maya would consult regarding natural phenomena, and with Maya kingship, where the water lily is often represented on royal Mayan headdresses. The actual effects of ingesting this plant are similar, though lesser in scale, to opium, and was used as a sedative that could calm, reduce pain, and perhaps entrance the user. As a quick note, the use of water lilies is often thought of in the same way that the ancient Egyptians may have used the blue lotus, so make sure to check out the previous lecture for a cool parallel. The Maya also had no shortage of full-fledged hallucinogens. Magic mushrooms, formerly of the genus Cyclobib, contained the active ingredients psilocybin and bisaglocin, and once ingested, these mushrooms can create intense hallucinogenic effects, including euphoria, detachment, visual distortion, and introspection. It is assumed from the hallucinogenic effects that these mushrooms were used for entheogenic purposes. But little historical information exists to confirm or deny this hypothesis. Instead, what we have are mushroom stones, these kind of small sculptures that look like mushrooms, often with a human figure at the bottom, as well as some visual depictions in the Tepantla mural at Teotihuacan, which dates to roughly 500 CE. and shows mushrooms growing from where the raindrops of the gods fall. Later, Spanish texts state the mushrooms were also eaten in order to cure fever and gout, perhaps not as an obvious conclusion from mushroom consumption. Peyote, a small spineless cactus, was also ingested for its hallucinogenic effects. The alkaloid mescaline is the main active ingredient that causes hallucinations. Peyote can also cause vomiting and nausea before moving into a kind of sensory phase full of colorful hallucinations and an altered sense of time and space. One Spanish priest noted that in addition to any ritual use, it was also sometimes used in warfare, since it allowed warriors to fight with no thought of fear, thirst, or hunger, protecting them from all danger. Okay, so to sum up, the Maya and their ancestors used a wide array of mind-altering substances for a lot of different purposes. The Spanish historical record shows that some of this was certainly ritual, but much of it was mundane as well. These psychoactive drugs were used to help cure illness or to help in battle. In the time we have left, I want to share a little bit more about mind-altering substances in the Americas by talking about the use of drugs in Incan cultures in South America. Much of this revolves around coca, which you would know most commonly in the form of cocaine. But the way they used it in the Inca world was far milder than what we think of today, and where it makes you stronger without the possibility of an overdose, something that's really different from modern forms of cocaine. So we'll go into a lot more depth about the history of the Inca in Module 12, but to contextualize things, it's important to note that the Inca Empire was located throughout the western part of South America. It was the largest and most expansive of all the pre-Spanish empires, stretching from Santiago in modern-day Chile through the entirety of Peru, all the way to Quito in modern-day Ecuador, a distance of some 3,000 miles. The Inca Empire began its rise in the highlands of Peru in the 13th century, reached its peak just around the time the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the area in the early 1500s, and slowly began to collapse by 1527. The Inca made incredible advancements during this period in power. Their art, especially textiles and metalwork, remains some of the finest and most sophisticated in the Americas. Their architecture, noted for its impeccable stonework, could adapt to nearly any terrain. And their agricultural terracing, thousands of feet up on Andean mountainsides, allowed the Inca to thrive in a landscape few would live in today. Machu Picchu, of course, stands as a pinnacle of these impressive achievements. Anyone who lived through America's war on drugs in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, or anybody who's seen Narcos on Netflix, often associates South America with one particular drug, cocaine. From Pablo Escobar to the Colombian cartels, cocaine has played an indelible role in the recent history of South America. But centuries, even millennia, before this powerful powder became the face of an entire war, the coca leaf, the plant from which cocaine is derived, was used for stimulating effects. Coca leaves come from a plant that grows in South America. It's a pretty regular-looking bush or tree growing about 8 to 10 feet in height, but the leaves contain a powerful alkaloid, the cocaine alkaloid, which has incredible properties. Now, the modern problems associated with cocaine arise from the extraction and condensation of this alkaloid, but in antiquity, the use of the leaves themselves was much milder. In ancient South America, coca leaves were used in two primary ways. They could be chewed, which would release the alkaloid, or they could be brewed into a tea, which would also allow for the cocaine alkaloid to be released. With both of these, however, the concentration of the alkaloid is vastly smaller than with pure cocaine. Chewing the leaves is still a stimulant, however, and it increases one's resistance to hunger and pain and fatigue. But it does so at a much milder level, and it doesn't produce dependence or addiction. In fact, coca leaves a coca leaf or two are sometimes used to help wean people off of the dangerous concentrated version of this drug. Now, in case you are wondering about the coca in Coca-Cola, the soft drink no longer uses coca leaves. They used to, however, incorporating 5 ounces of coca leaves per gallon of syrup, a recipe far more concentrated than simply chewing leaves or brewing a tea. It was estimated that Coca-Cola contained about 9 milligrams per glass, about a quarter to an eighth of a line of cocaine, but nearly double of what you'd get from chewing leaves or having coca tea. According to one myth, the origin of the coca plant comes from Kuka, the most beautiful woman in the world. She was so beautiful that no man could resist her, and she would use these powers of beauty to entrance men and to take advantage of them. Soon, one of the Incan deities had had enough, and he ordered her to be sacrificed, cut in two, and buried in the ground. And from that spot, an incredible plant grew, one that gave you strength and stamina and took away pain. And the people called the plant coca in honor of the beautiful woman. Evidence for the presence of coca leaves in the Andes dates back approximately 8,000 years, roughly 3,000 years before the pyramids in Egypt were ever built, and a full 7,000 years before the Inca Empire hit its peak. And traces of coca have been found on pre-Incan mummies dating back nearly 5,000 years ago. Suffice it to say, the use of coca has a deep, deep history in Andean cultures of South America. The pottery from the Moche period, a precursor about 1,000 years prior to the Inca, provides further evidence of the use of coca leaves in pre-Incan Andean societies. These ceramic sculptures were often anthropomorphic, as evidenced by this coquero, a figure chewing coca leaves dating back to about 1000 CE. Moreover, Moche mummies have been found with sacks of coca leaves preserved by the incredibly arid climate of South America's west coast. Finally, we have lime containers used to help improve the extraction of the alkaloid from the coca leaf, and thus to enhance the effects of the chewing process. So the use of the coca leaves in South America goes deep into antiquity. There seems to be a more or less unbroken chain of coca use for roughly 8,000 years, from just after the end of the last ice age to the present day. Let's take a quick look at what happens when the Incan Empire takes over and the role of coca in this empire building. With the rise of the Inca Empire, coca became the privilege of the aristocratic class. The state slowly took control over the plant, limiting its use to people in the army, public workers, and the royal court. During this time, coca also became widely used as an entheogen, a psychoactive substance used to elevate consciousness for religious or spiritual purposes. According to another myth, Inca viewed coca as a gift from the god of agriculture for their hard labor in the fields, and leaves would be dedicated to the gods, buried with the dead for use in the afterlife, and locked in amulets to provide the wearer with the blessings of the gods. As Spanish conquistadores gained greater and greater power over the Inca, the use of coca by Incan populations became more widespread. In large part, coca began to be used for pragmatic purposes in order to get through a day full of hard labor. The Spanish were always skeptical of the coca plant, as they saw chewing the leaves as a kind of idolatrous act. Yet its presence didn't dissipate. Juan de Montezano, governor of Peru in the 16th century, opined that, quote, to want no coca is to want no Peru at all. The conquistador Pedro Cesar de Leon noted that, quote, throughout Peru, the Indians carry this coca in their mouths, and from the morning until they lie down to sleep, they never take it out. Finally, Father Cobo, writing a century later, recalls that the locals, quote, say that coca gives them strength, and they feel neither thirst, hunger, nor tiredness. They work twice as hard with it. In 1993, 3 child mummies, the victims of human sacrifice, were discovered by archaeologists on a mountaintop in Argentina. These were victims of human sacrifice during the Inca Empire, and it's kind of jarring to see pictures of them because of the high levels of preservation, which make them look so alive. Analysis of their hair and tissues shows that these mummies were likely chosen about a year before their death for sacrifice, and during that time, their diet changed to include both coca and alcohol. And in the weeks leading up to their sacrifice, the consumption of both of these changed drastically. So we can see here these drugs had a religious use, and that religious practices can often differ drastically from what we believe is right today. But coca wasn't the only mind-altering substance used in ancient South America. Lower down in the Amazonian basin, populations drank a magical brew known as ayahuasca. The drink itself was made of a local vine, and when consumed, it produces hallucinogenic effects. As a result, ayahuasca has been used since at least the time of the Inca Empire for both medicinal and spiritual purposes. And while the Inca, primarily in the Andean highlands, lived through trade and exchange, would have brought these items up into the Andes from the lowlands. We can say that this kind of hallucinogenic drink really originated in the lowlands, but came to be widely consumed throughout the Incan Empire. Imbibing the drink can cause intense audio and visual stimulation, great elation or fear, and intense vomiting. And while only some of those things sound like fun, you can see why this would be used to access the spiritual realm or cleanse the body of sickness or bad spirits. The Inca also partook in far less mind-altering beverages. Chicha, a type of fermented corn beer, was the most popular Incan alcoholic drink. The preparation process for chicha began with people actually chewing corn kernels, since saliva helped convert starch to sugar, facilitating the fermentation process. This mixture was then combined with water and allowed to ferment and turn into alcohol. Chicha is used for a wide variety of purposes. When the Spanish first arrived in Peru, the Inca king offered a golden caro, a drinking vessel like this one here, filled with chicha, an offering to start political conversations. And in Incan religion, chicha was offered to the gods, poured on the ground to Pachamama, also known as the Mother Earth, and raised skywards to the Apis or mountain gods. It was also consumed heavily by the practitioners themselves. All right, so to wrap up here, coca, ayahuasca, chicha have all been used as mind-altering substances in ancient South America. And they've been used for a variety of purposes, religious and medicinal, as well as social and pragmatic. Just like with coca leaves, you can still partake in drinking chicha if you go to Peru today.